it is unbelievable how weedless this dude is, rigged that way, even without a weedless hook. It is extremely weedless because that hook points up. So if you imagine coming up to a piece of wood, your line's gonna be here, it's gonna wanna lift that over it, and then it's just gonna be the worm that drags over it. So it is a very, very weedless rig, whether or not you're using a weedless hook. Hey everybody, welcome back to the garage. We're in here today talking a little bit about some soft plastic setups and different techniques that I use all season long out there on the Bass Pro Tour. And a lot of these are a lot of finesse techniques. I think of that a lot when I'm using a soft plastic bait. Just something more finesse, and this is definitely one of them, and it's one that I have embraced more in the last couple of years. I had heard about it, I'm going to say, maybe 5 or 6 years ago. Honestly didn't know what it was, or how it different from other, similar type rigs, until I started really getting into it, really diving into it and learning more about what it was, just the presentation and why this is so effective out there on the water for me in certain situations. And the one I'm talking about is a Neko rig. Taking a straight tail worm and hooking it in the middle, it's not anything new anymore. We consider that, to be something that's wacky rigged. And when I first started seeing this, I'm like, well, it's just a nail weighted wacky rig, but it's really not. The way you hook the worm has so much effect on how that worm falls, how deep you can fish it, a lot of different things. So let's get right into it and how you rig this up the way that I like to fish it. So for one, you're gonna always use a nail weight with a Neko rig. If you're not using a nail weight, it's not a Neko rig, okay? So if you don't have some type of weight in that worm, it just is not a Neko rig. And then I'll mention the bait before we get into it. This is a Bass Pro Magnum cut tail worm. That's one of my favorite worms for Neko rigging. I like that little thin tail, how it comes down, and it's got that little piece, almost like part of a paddle tail on that. Almost any worm will work. A regular finesse worm works. A Magnum finesse worm is great to Neko rig with. But I've caught a lot of fish on this Magnum cut tail worm, rigging it Neko style. Okay, so that nail weight, you're going to take the fat end of the worm, and this goes for anything, whatever basically the head of the worm would be. You're going to put that nail weight right inside of there, and I carry a 32nd ounce, I carry 16th ounce, and then I carry like I've got a 7/64 and an 1/8 ounce, which are really, really close. 8/64 would be an 1/8, but then I carry those heavier ones. So I really only carry like 3 sizes. A 3/32 would be a good one to put in there in between those two as well. But yeah, 3 or 4 sizes of nail weights are all you use. But the 16th is definitely my go-to size. So you've got your nail weight in there. You want to make sure that it's completely hid, and try to push it in there as straight as you can. You can see it's got just a little bit of bend to it. Totally fine with that. But you want to make sure that you get that completely in there, hid, because they will, on occasion, if you catch 2 or 3 fish on this worm, they'll want to sling that weight out. So you want to try to maximize that as much as you can. Now here you've got a couple options. I've started using like this VMC Neko or wacky rigging tool. It's got the little bands that you can put on that worm. I think these are called a crossover ring. They work really well. They work great on a wacky rig. They work great on a Neko rig. If this is a step you don't want to do, you don't have to. It absolutely is not necessary, but it will a lot of times help you prolong the life of your bait. Instead of probably getting 1, never more than 2 fish out of a bait, sometimes you can get as many as 4 or 5, even 6 using one of those rings. So to do that, you just take that ring, and you want to match it up. They've got them in all different sizes. You want one that's going to compress that worm a little bit. You don't want one that's going to be loose fitting. Otherwise, you're just going to go to cast and your worm's going to fly out of the ring. So you got to match that up to the size of the bait you're fishing, but put it on the end of those pliers, okay? Squeeze the handle, and that's going to open that up. Place your worm right on through there, and then pull that worm out however far you want that ring to sit. I like it to be closer to the bottom edge of the worm, so I'm going to go ahead and take it off of there. So you release what you were squeezing, slide it off, And there you go. So now your ring is on there. But I like it to be closer to the weight, you know, closer to the head of the worm than the tail. So somewhere right in that range, right in there is about right. And that's how that ring is going to fit, okay? So now if you still were just wanting to nail weight a wacky rig, obviously you would hook it like this. But with a Neko rig, you run your hook in line with the worm, okay? And I always do my hook point up. So the weight's down here on the bottom, the hook point's gonna be opposite of that because that's how I want it to sit on the bottom, okay? If I've got that hook pointed the other direction, when a fish eats that, the hook is gonna be pointed down towards the bottom of his mouth. I'm gonna set the hook up. I'm probably not gonna hook that fish. You'll catch some of them, but your hookup ratio is not gonna be nearly as good, and you're gonna get hung up a lot more. Fishing it like this, I use a VMC, that's the weedless Neko hook. That's the hook I like because it is just that much more weedless. It is unbelievable how weedless this dude is, rigged that way, even without a weedless hook. It is extremely weedless because that hook points up. So if you imagine coming up to a piece of wood, your line's gonna be here, it's gonna wanna lift that over it, and then it's just gonna be the worm that drags over it. So it is a very, very weedless rig, whether or not you're using a weedless hook. So that's just something to keep in mind. If you're in a place that's got a lot of snags and stuff, man, a Neko rig comes through that cover extremely well. So that is the whole deal right there. Yeah, that added step of the ring is something that can add more life to your baits. You can get more fish out of a bait on occasion with that. But a nail weight that's in there, that is definitely a big part of it. So, you know, having plenty of those nail weights, if you're going Neko rig fishing, you definitely want to do that. And for me, I always use tungsten ones. I just like the fact that they are smaller than lead, but as long as it makes the worm sink, it makes the worm sink. So that's all you're trying to do with that. But that's a Neko rig setup. I hope this is something you've learned, man. That there's been a lot of occasions on the Bass Pro Tour or just out fishing that dude has caught a lot of bass for me, you know, and all kinds of situations. So whether that's skipping under docks or it's out offshore, you know, fishing on a Tennessee River ledge lake, this thing right here will put some bass in the boat. Hope this helps you out next time you're out on the water.